Well, I decided to volunteer for the RAF for pilot training in 1941. Before that, I'd spent half of a year on factories making munitions. After being kitted out, I was then posted to Scarborough, and this was the initial training wing, ITW. I was now a pupil pilot. And then they kitted me out with I quickly found out that I was going to go to South Africa. And then after the 6 months was up, I was posted to EFTS, that's Elementary Flying Training School. That was at Benoni. The aeroplane I was going to be taught to fly on first of all was the Tiger Moth with just the 2 seats, for the pupil pilot in the front one and the instructor in the one behind him. You are taught the elements of how to handle the controls, and also, of course, you start flying the machine. And the most difficult part for somebody like me who had never flown in an aeroplane before, the most difficult part was bringing the machine down and landing it on the grass airfield. Eventually, I managed to go solo, so then I progressed onto the different manoeuvres. Most of them included sort of aerobatic manoeuvres. The basic one, which most people will follow, is what is called a loop, loop the loop.
My mother received a telegram in late 1943 telling her that her husband had been killed, missing, presumed dead. He was on the ship, the Intrepid. Because of the confusion during the war, she was told very little. I can't remember when she actually told me that my father had been killed, because he was killed in the September and I was born in the February of 1944. She was told that his ship had been bombed by Germans and it had gone down off the coast of North Africa. And that was a story that we had for many, many years.
I was in the Navy for a long, long while, right from my early years, 1948. I had a very interesting life while I was in the Navy. Went to countless places all over the world and met countless people, some of quite prominence and things, such as the Duke of Edinburgh, Princess Margaret, the Queen himself, and of course they used to come on board on a regular basis. We took them all over the place, South Africa, Madeira and places like that, and we had a good time, because being a boy seaman in those early days, it was what they classed as secondary training.
And so then I was posted to the Service Flying Training School, that's SFTS. And this was an airfield called Nigel. The aeroplane I was going to fly was the Airspeed Oxford. And this is a twin-engined aeroplane, which is fitted out with a bomb bay so that the trainee bomb aimer can lay on his tummy and drop bombs on the agreed target, which would be well marked. Bomb aimer was one of the pupil pilots. So the next time you flew, you would be the bomb aimer and your colleague would be the pilot. One of the Airspeed Oxfords would tow what was called a drogue, which was a bit like a windsock, and it was fixed on a long cable to the machine, and then the one who was going to practice as an air gunner would fire real bullets at the drogue.
in the late 1980s, my sister decided to see if she could find out a bit more. So she wrote to the War Graves Commission to see if she could find anything out, and she couldn't. After some research, they said that 14 people had actually been killed on that particular attack, and that was it. She and my brother-in-law used to go to the Greek islands a lot, and it was coincidental that she happened to be having a conversation with some people and talking about my dad and the ship, etc., etc. And on the table in the cafe where they were sitting was a young English guy who was a tour guide. He came over and he said, "I'm really sorry, I couldn't help overhearing your conversation." He said, "But I live on the island of Leros, and I live next door to the British cemetery." And he said, "I'm sure I've seen gravestones to do with the Intrepid." He said, "Next time I go back, I'll have a look and see what I can find out." Anyway, a couple of days later, he came back, found my sister again, and he said, yes, he said, there's 6 gravestones.
My mother died when I was 7 years old, and my father had a decent job, but as per normal in those days, he found it very, very hard to keep his job and to look after me in the kind of conditions that I was always used to. And then one day, just a few weeks after my mother died, he got me into the sitting room and explained to me he was awfully sorry, but just for the time being I'd have to go into a boys' home anyway until he could sort his life out. Which eventually, because of his perseverance and his dogma way of doing things, we finished up with a lady who he knew and I knew, who came to be our housekeeper, and she was everything that I could possibly ask for, except being the mother's name on a piece of paper. And I was only too pleased when that all took place, and he got in touch with me and said, "I've got some great news for you. This coming weekend I'm coming to pick you up, and your time in the children's home is now over, and you'll come back and live with us as a normal family."
You have now been posted from Coastal Command and you're going to Bomber Command, because obviously Bomber Command had lost so many pilots that they wanted to take all the new pilots from Coastal Command. And of course the main thing in England was that we had to fly at night. We hadn't done any training of flying at night time in South Africa, so we had to fly on what was called a beacon crawl, so that you would recognise a beacon's position by the Morse code letters which it was flashing.
And they found the cemetery, and they found the gravestones. There was 3 with names on them, and there was 3 that said, "No, none, only unto God." I was living in France at the time, and my sister wrote to me and showed me a photograph of her standing by these gravestones and said, "The 3 that were named are not our dad." And in 2004, we decided to go to Kos for a holiday. And my sister rang me up one day and said, "Oh, on September the 26th, on the island of Leros, they have a ceremony a bit like our November the 11th. So she said, if you're going to be over there then, she said, perhaps you could go over." Anyway, we did. Found the cemetery and found the gravestones. Now, bearing in mind this was 2004. And when I got to the 6 gravestones, there were 5 named. And one of them was my dad. And I couldn't believe it. It was so surreal. I actually phoned my sister and asked my sister what my dad's name was, because I just couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Well, I lived at a place called Wyndham, just outside Norwich, 10 miles from Norwich. Close to Wyndham as you could possibly get was a very large American airbase. And they done as prayer by every Saturday. They would take the school kids from the town of Wyndham by either bus or lorries back to the camp, the RAF, the American Air Force Base. They treated us as if we were really wanted looking after, which was a great thing. We got sweets and chocolate and hamburgers and things like that, things that we never seen because of the war years. When I had to leave school and Dad said, what do you want to do? Well, I didn't really know what to do because I wasn't that brainy at school by any means. I had a good vision of what was going on around me and I could look after myself and handle myself. But I said I'd like to go in the Navy.
And then from that I was posted to OCU, and this was going to be on the Wellington, which is a twin-engined, very heavy aeroplane. Originally it was the frontline bomber for the RAF. We had to do so many hours on that. First of all, cross countries, but also they included a special operation known as a Bullseye. In the RAF they use these different code words to carry out secret operations, and the Bullseye was where you were briefed on where the target was going to be, and your bomb aimer was given a whole batch of leaflets which he had to drop through a special chute which was fitted on the aeroplane. And so you would actually fly to a target in Germany, and your bomb aimer would drop the leaflets, which would of course give messages to the German people about how Hitler was doing all these bad things and so forth. So the Bullseye, of course, meant that you could be attacked by a German fighter if you were unlucky. On one exercise, on the way back to Peplo, I had the message, or my wireless operator had the message, that we were diverted because of bad weather at Peplo. So we were diverted to a valley, which is on the Isle of Anglesey. There was a terribly bad snowstorm. And with this snowstorm at night time, we could not see anything on the ground at all. So that as I came on the approach to Lander Valley, when I got down to 300 feet, I couldn't see a thing. So there was the only thing you must do then to save your life and that of your crew is to overshoot. So every time you did a missed approach, you were going to get back to 3,000 feet altitude and carry out the whole exercise again. But eventually I did see a light and altered course so that I then got on and I landed on the runway.
Back in the late 90s, a lady was researching the remains of her brother, who'd also been on the Intrepid. And she came across a book written by the captain of the Intrepid, which is now out of print. And in it, it mentions her brother who was killed on Leros, and he was buried on the island in this cemetery. She photographed this and sent it off to the War Commission and said, one of those buried is my brother and I would like him named. And on the same page was my father's name.
And lo and behold, it wasn't long before I got the information to report to HMS Shockley, which is just the other side of Ipswich on the river. At a particular date and time, the routine wouldn't be allowed to take place these days because of it wasn't brutal in the sense of cruelness, but the general attitude to the way things were done made it very hard for a 15-year-old boy. You just had to do what you were told to do. One example that I've mentioned countless times before is you always had well, at Ganges, you always had a muster time in the evenings just after tea, and everybody had to be accounted for. But on this particular night, one boy was missing. We were told to get into the pyjamas, nothing else, just pyjamas, no shoes and socks. And we were marched up to the quarterdeck, which is just outside the officers' mess. And we stood there from 6:15 at night till 8:30 the following morning, with nothing on whatsoever all night long, with no shoes and socks on. And that was in the middle of November. 6 o'clock in the morning, nothing but a pair of shorts, no shoes, socks or anything, up and over the mast. It was quite a brutal routine. And if you could swim, you were quids in. But if you couldn't swim, God help you, you know. They showed you what to do, and that was it. And they used to walk around with, they called them prod poles. There's a long pole, and if you were desperate to get to the side, they wouldn't let you get hold of the pole, they'd just push you away with the pole, and you had to make an effort. And the final examination in the swimming pool, you had to dress, fully dressed with all the full uniform, overcoat, hobnail boots, and you used to have to swim 2 lengths of the swimming pool. That was absolutely cruel, that was, honestly. How some of them made it, I shall never know to this day, but they did. You couldn't do nothing else but do it.
My next posting was to convert to a 4-engined bomber. And the one I had to fly was the Halifax. 4 engines and fitted up with a bomb bay and the 2 turrets, I think it had, for the gunners to protect the aeroplane. And I carried out a limited number of exercises on the Halifax. By then I had almost a complete crew. So I then picked up my flight engineer, and I was then posted to a base known as the Lancaster Finishing School. And so for the first time, I was going to fly the Lancaster. Time they gave us at Lancaster Finishing School was 6 hours, that was all. 6 hours flying on the Lancaster, completing circuits and then 1 or 2 cross countries, and that was all. I was then posted to my first squadron, and this was at Kirmington, which is an airfield not far from Grimsby, and the number of the squadron was 166. After a week, I was told that I would now fly with an experienced bomber crew. as what was called a second dicky.
Apparently they did write to my mother in 98, but sadly my mother had passed away in 95 anyway, and she hadn't lived in that address that they had for donkey's years. But they kindly sent me a copy of the letter. So that was that. So at least we know now, but it was a really strange thing. Some research and some coincidence.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah, it is. It's quite, 61 years later.
I used to go on the river in the mornings, 6 o'clock in the morning, nothing on but a pair of shorts. And used to have to row up and down that river shortly. Boat was huge. Some boys could hardly lift the oars, let alone pull the oars back, to row with.
Bomber Command operations, a majority of them were targets in the Ruhr Valley, which of course were munition factories which the Germans were using for their war effort. But we also had oil tankers which we bombed. One of the main targets was the D-Day invasion of Europe, and I was briefed to fly to a target which was south of the Normandy landings, to the railway marshalling yards, because if we could knock these out of action by bombing them, then the Germans could not bring up reinforcements against the Normandy landings. When I crossed the Channel, the English Channel, luckily there was only half of the cloud cover, so I was able to look down and I could see all of the invasion ships, which each one of which had a balloon tethered to the ship by a long cable and flying at a good height above the ship, so that the Germans couldn't send intruders to attack the invasion ships.
If you fell foul of the routine and things like that, and you got what they called jankers, which was punishment, you used to have to go to the sergeant master at arms place about tea time every night, just after tea, fully dressed and booted and spurred with a rifle, and you'd get everything, all your gear, and you used to have to, what they called, go on to Laundry Hill. That was what it was called, because it was quite a steep hill, and you used to have to go round and round and round in a circle. And the duty instructor, who was on punishment that day, was sitting in a big armchair in the middle reading the paper, and all he kept saying was, "Rear man at the front." And that meant the rear man on the row had to race past everybody else and get to the front. And as soon as he got there, rear man at the front. Still, there was no jogging, it was racing all the while. And that's what they kept you up to it. Eventually, we all passed out and we were designated to move to our first ship, which in my case, as I said, was HMS Vanguard, the battleship.
Another operation, we were briefed to fly to bomb some oil tanks on the estuary of the Gironde River in Europe. And we were briefed to fly at 100 feet, which was very unusual. In Bomber Command, if you were caught carrying out unauthorized low flying, you might well be subject of a court-martial. And yet here we were, instead of flying at our usual bombing height of 20,000 feet, we were briefed to fly at 100 feet, having finished my tour of 31 operations in Bomber Command. I was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross at the end of 1944. In 1945, my squadron, 166, was disbanded. So I marched on parade to hand over the badge for 166 Squadron. The crew of a Lancaster.
Are you on there?
Yes, I'm in the middle. I've never worn this medal before.
Why not?
Why not?
I don't know.
Did you know that? You've never worn it. You've never worn it.